Hi everyone, thanks for joining in. My name is Karan Rao and I'm a senior PM at Microsoft. Today I'm going to be talking to you about how you can transition from grad school into a product management role. Before we dive into today's agenda, let me introduce myself first. So I started off my career with Accenture. I joined them as a business technology consultant. I did that for a bunch of years, and then I decided that I wanted to go back to grad school. So I went to grad school at UC Berkeley, and during this time, I had the opportunity to work with a few companies. So I worked with Salesforce for a bit, where I was a technical PM. And then I transitioned over and started working with a bunch of startups in Silicon Valley. I did that for a few years, and I was a product manager there. And then finally, I moved over to Microsoft, where I'm currently at, and I've been here for a couple of years now. And I'm a senior PM at Microsoft. So as you can see, I've been on that very journey that a lot of y'all must be currently on, and what we're going to be talking about today. So here's what the agenda for today looks like. Let's first start off by understanding who is a product manager. With that understanding, we will then look at what are some of the traits of a good product manager. We will then look at what a product manager does not do. I think that's super important because it helps you understand what you're really getting yourself into, right? After that, we'll cover what a typical student's journey looks like. This journey has been put together after one of my colleagues, Parv and I, have spoken to and interviewed about hundreds of graduate students. Through that lens of that journey, we will then look at what are some of the things that you can do to get yourself ahead of the game. So let's get started. So who's a product manager? Product managers basically bring to market new products and features that simultaneously benefit customers and add business value. I think this definition succinctly captures the nuances of this role because depending on which part of the organization you're working in, your customers may be internal or external, but fundamentally you're always trying to add value for these customers, right? By solving some unmet need of theirs. At the same time, you are striving to get a return on investment for your company by shipping that feature or product, right? So fundamentally, it's at this intersection between constantly trying to balance the needs of your customers and that of your organization where you'll find yourself always operating in. So now that we have this understanding of who is a product manager, let's look at what are some of the traits that make a product manager successful, right? So first thing that is super important, in my opinion, is takes personal ownership of the product, right? This is something that you really, really have to get yourself comfortable with. Your job as a product manager doesn't really end once you gather requirements and ship a feature, right? You really have to work with your customers to make sure that you have the right adoption and the right rollout for your product. Then there's understanding your customer, right? This is again extremely important because you need to be comfortable having difficult conversations with your customers. This helps you tease apart what their needs are from what their wants are, right? Then there's this whole aspect of applying business acumen. At the end of the day, everything you ship must have a return on investment, right? You need to be able to have those conversations on what features need to get prioritized. You also need to be able to define the outcomes you're striving for and how you'll measure them. Then there's this whole aspect of turning data into insight that drives product investment. I think this is super important, right? Because data comes in from different shapes and forms. You have data coming in from customers who speak to you. You have data from customers reaching out directly and giving you feedback. You have data from actual customer usage, and then you have data coming in from market trends, right? As a PM, it becomes critical that you're able to synthesize all of this data to make actionable insights that drive product investment. The next 2 points really talk about rallying the team and driving culture, right? It's super important because at every point of time as a product manager, you're really trying to influence people who may or may not report to you directly, right? And then it's all about rallying the organization and different parts of the organization to buy into your product vision. With that in mind, let's look at what does a PM not do, right? Fundamentally, in big tech, if you are working as a product manager, these are some of the things that you don't typically do. So first thing is write code, right? And I think this is something that is super important to understand. There is a nuance out here that you have to get in terms of you're not expected to write code, but you're expected to understand how code is written, and you're expected to understand system architecture, right? Especially if you're working in big tech, and that helps you having that conversation with your engineering teams to ship the right features, helps you have conversations with them to understand what prioritization, what trade-offs can be made, right? So even though you don't write code, I would caveat with saying you need to understand how code is written and how code is shipped. You're not expected to run dev scrums. That's something that you shouldn't be looking at doing. Running dev scrums, writing minutes of the meeting, all of that stuff is not what a product manager does. You're not expected to author test plan and drive test execution. That's something that you shouldn't be fundamentally looking at. You're not expected to sign partnership deals. And it's super important to understand that a product manager is not the same as a release manager, and it's not the same thing as a scrum master or a project manager. These are distinctly different roles in the organization, and each of them have their own traits, and each of them have their own responsibilities, and each of them have their own roles, right? So if maybe you as a person relate with more so being a project manager than a product manager, or vice versa, right? It really depends on the skill set that you have, but fundamentally, you need to understand that a product manager is not the same as these, right? So, I think with that in mind, when we've looked at what are the traits that you need to be successful, and we've looked at what you don't do, I think it's super important to understand that graduate school sets you up to help the skills required to become a great product manager, right? If you think back to the traits that make you successful, customer insights, synthesizing data, right? Leading people, understanding business sort of concepts. All of these topics are in some way or the other touched upon in graduate school, right? So I think it's important to understand that you are in a position to really learn these topics when you are at grad school. Okay, so now that we have that understanding of what are the traits required to become successful at being a PM, what does a PM not do, and what does a PM do, let's focus in on a student's journey, right? The way we're structured is we're looking at a typical graduate program, which is spread over 2 years, with an internship in the middle. Now, I think it's super important to understand that not each and every one of you will have a similar journey to what we're going to be looking at right now, but you can draw insights from different stages of this journey depending on where you are at. And the way we have created this entire journey map is that we've spoken to about like more than hundreds and hundreds of graduate students, and we've gathered their thoughts on how their journey went while they were at grad school. So let's look at this journey map. So the process starts off with post-admission, right, where you have finished applying to grad school, you've got an admit, and you've chosen your program, right? And now what we typically see is that student receives admit to grad school and they aspire to become a PM, right? And they do conduct some sort of preliminary research on what is a product manager and whether the grad school is going to set them up with success to becoming a product manager. And they do reach out to some alumni in some cases, right? What are some of the key points that we see? We see that students don't typically cash in on this period, and this period between getting an admit and actually starting grad school. It's either because they don't know how to, or they believe that they'll figure it out once they land in grad school, right? So if you are in this stage of your journey, I think it's super important that you understand that you use that time wisely and use it to really familiarize yourself with the product management position, right? So let's look at year one, sem one. This is when you've arrived in grad school, you're full of energy, but then we see certain things happen here where the student is typically swept away with the task of settling in and getting accustomed to their new setting. A lot of time is spent on socializing and getting accustomed to the lifestyle, right? And then once that happens is students do get caught up with classes and assignments. And this is typical for most people and it's completely acceptable. And it's just the entire sort of process of moving over, right, to a different part of the country or to a different sort of lifestyle as such. So what are the key points we see here? We see that students are under the impression that they have time, It's still really early on in the game. And then they believe that the classes that they are about to sign up for will somehow enhance their PM skills, which is true to a certain extent, and we'll talk more about this. I think it's super important that when you're in this phase, that you receive good guidance on how to prop yourself up for success, right? If you look at year one, sem two, this is when things start to get a little real, right? We see that this whole concept of job search starts to trigger panic, especially if it's something that is not coming easily. If you have to apply to a number of jobs, you have to try many avenues like pinging alumni, going on to different career fairs, and this is a typical sort of a journey that most people go through. But then it can be extremely stressful and can start to induce panic. So what are some of the things that you can look at here, right? So things become real extremely quickly, and it's important to keep panic at bay. And the way that you do that is that you need to have a good structure in place, and you need to be educated on interview prep. And essentially, what you're really looking at is when you get a chance, how well you set yourself up to take that chance, right? So the next phase that we see is an internship phase, right? And most people in a grad program do get an internship. Now, whether it's the internship that you wanted or is something close that you want, different people have different sort of journeys on that, right? But once you get into that internship, you may or may not get a return offer. That's up to like multiple factors. But what are some of the key aspects that we see here, right? A lot of times students go through the motion of their internship, and they're consumed with this task of just converting that internship so that they have a full-time offer. But then what you can really do out here is that you can use that time to build strong connections, and really use that opportunity to add value during your internship. um, Once that happens and then you're done with the internship, you move into year two. And we do typically see that as students move into year two, they have a much better understanding of the system. But then there's this realization that dawns is that if you don't convert your PM internship, then you're really in that bucket of trying to apply now for experienced PM roles, which you may or may not be qualified for, right? So what do you need to do over here? You fund that there's a fundamental paradigm shift that needs to occur, where the student now needs to showcase proven PM abilities, right? And just classwork is not going to suffice over here. So you have to sort of try to seek out and understand how you can break out of that university bubble and sort of embed yourself in real world situations. We'll touch upon that as we go ahead. So this is something that we're looking at. You should spend some time looking at this journey and trying to identify where you are at in this journey, and then sort of trying to establish what are the things that you can do to really boost your chances of success, right? So how do you navigate this journey, right? What are some of the tips and tricks that you can do to successfully prop yourself up for success, right? So I would say step one is to spend time early on understanding product management and the different types of product management positions, right? Different companies have different positions. There, for example, there are PMs who work on growth. There are PMs who work on marketplaces. There are PMs who work on commerce, right? Understanding what is your sort of forte and understanding the different roles, and getting a good understanding of what product management is all about. Going back to those traits that we spoke of and understanding, what is required from that role as such. And then the second aspect is based on your experience, and the graduate program that you are in, figure out the ideal program management role for yourself, right? So once you sort of um, look at if you have a lot of years of work experience and then you go into a graduate program, your sort of journey is going to be different from someone who relatively has lower work years of work experience and then went to a graduate program, right? So then you got to get a sense of, okay, do I need to apply for an associate product management role, or do I need to apply for a senior product management role, or do I go into a generalist sort of product management role? So that's something that you need to understand, and it is dependent on your past experience and the graduate program that you are at. The next step is get a sense of skills that you want to improve on, and then sort of tailor your coursework towards those skills, right? So the main sort of tenets, if you look at from a product management perspective, are getting a sense of a product analytics, product design. Then you're looking at the technical aspect of it, and then you're looking at creating new products, and you're sort of leading people's skills, right? These tenants, getting a sense of where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are, and then sort of tailoring your coursework to sort of enhance those skills are super important. Then this is something that we sort of touched upon earlier, is actively seeking out projects, right, on and off campus, which will help develop your PM skills. Break out from that sort of bubble of grad school and just going into classes, and look around you. I'm sure there are a lot of professors in your college. There are a lot of startups around your college where you do have the opportunity to start to work with them and leverage that time while you're there, to seek out projects and where you can really add value for them. And it's a win-win for both of you all, right? Because then you start to develop your own PM skills, which you can showcase later on. And then the next aspect is product management interview prep is extremely real, right? Start as early as possible. And the way to do this is sort of look at, if you're in grad school, start to identify people who you can sort of have real world interview prep with. Don't focus on trying to prep all on your own. It is an extremely sort of challenging task to do that. It's important for you to get feedback, and sort of embed yourself with the right people who can help you prep, and then get real world feedback is super important, and start as early as possible. That's something that can be a real differentiator for you. So at this point, I'd like to thank you for joining in. I hope this was super useful to you. We try to make this as practical as possible so that you can get some real value out of this talk. If you do have any sort of additional questions, do feel free to contact me. And here is my LinkedIn profile. Happy to sort of help guide you through the process if you have any questions. Thank you so much for joining in.